All right. Hello, everybody. Dominic Robbie here with WCC, and it is a distinct honor and privilege to interview Alex McDougall with Bicameral Ventures, the CIO of Bicameral Ventures. Alex, how are you today?
Fantastic, Dominic. Thanks for having me. Much appreciated. I really enjoyed your event last month in Vegas and excited to be here.
Well, I appreciate that because I think you were one of the stars of the panel that you spoke on, which was Is Equity Dead? Right? And so you with some fellow other VCs were present, and you had some major insights to share with the entire audience. And so we really appreciated that. But before we dive into that, Alex, how about if we go into a little bit of your background? Obviously, you're the CIO of a Toronto-based VC, dedicated to blockchain investing. So, give us a little bit of background. What were you doing before blockchain? Were you also in another VC? Just kind of tell us a little bit how you got into this ecosystem.
Sure. I'm actually a rescued investment banker, so this is a lot more fun doing what we do now. So the Bicameral Ventures came about when me and my partner actually went to do our school together in the University of Toronto, our MBA. And just like most people who finish an MBA, he became a consultant and I became an investment banker. And we realized quickly that challenging to do really earth-shattering stuff from within the giant walls of some of Canada's biggest institutions, Deloitte and Bank of Montreal, but obviously generated amazing, really interesting experiences there. But I ended up doing mergers and acquisitions and then working on the fintech desk afterwards. My partner split out and started one of the first Canadian blockchain practices within Deloitte. And then spun out and did an enterprise blockchain startup called Nuco that became Aon, which now is rebranded to something that's really interesting I'll talk a little bit about later, called the Open Application Network. And from my desk at Bank of Montreal, I was covering Nuco, the enterprise blockchain startup. And it's really where we reconnected and bonded over a couple of things and a couple of ideas. And one of the biggest ones being that the way technology is going now is our ability to connect with each other is increasing exponentially, and our ability to transact with each other is increasing at that same rate. But our ability to actually digitally trust each other is falling off a cliff.
Right.
We've never been more intermediated. We've never needed more people and parties sitting in between all of our interactions in our entire history of interacting with each other. Whether it's even chat, search, commerce, all of those things now have these big chunky intermediaries sitting in the middle of it. And there's a huge value gap that's emerging in our lack of ability to directly one-on-one trust each other. So we thought there's this massive $1 trillion value proposition out there. What's the best way to start attacking this and to start accessing some of the value pockets of this gigantic problem? And really, we came to realize that blockchain is a massive part of the solution to this. But blockchain in its current iteration is going to be adopted by 100,000, 1 million, maybe 100 million people. But they're going to be the leading edge vanguard of the technology and technophiles, given how raw it is, given how rough it is, given how little there's been a focus on the user experience side to date. And so where we kind of thought and where we really merged our two skill sets is, what do we need to do to get 1 billion people on blockchain or 2 billion people on blockchain? And it's not pitching decentralization. It's not pitching this anarchy, stateless money. All of that's fantastic and really necessary and a really cool way to get involved and get emotionally attached to the technology. But it's going to be when you try and get people's grandmothers involved with blockchain, the 1 billion, 2 billion, it's going to be something that's cheaper. It's going to be something that's faster. It's going to be something that's more provably private or more tailored. Just something that hits your lizard brain that's a visceral value proposition. And that's really what we organized Bicameral around is how do we see this world that we want to be in 15 years? And what are the sequences of events that we need to put in place to get there? And what can we do today to start building out those bridges to get 1 billion, 2 billion people onto this type of technology? And so I can talk through a few different parts of that angle, but effectively that's the biggest picture thesis of the fund. So we raised venture funds focused at investing at various layers of the type of technology. And then now we're out in the market raising for a couple of newer opportunities. all within that same vein, but exploring different angles and different adjacent technologies as well.
Well, I love what you're doing there because you're really looking with the end in mind, which is what's the vision that you want to create here 10, 20, 30 years down the road, and then reverse engineering from there rather than just kind of picking a horse and saying, oh, that looks interesting, we'll invest in that, right? And just having this really kind of fragmented view of like just trying to extrapolate value wherever you possibly can. You're actually looking to create the kind of society from a VC fund's view, right? Or from a VC fund's resources to really like looking at how do I want to create what I want to create and then reverse engineering it from that. I think that's a completely different perspective than a lot of people do.
Dominic, that's actually where the name Bicameral came from, is everything that we look at first and foremost is a great venture capital opportunity, great business model, great team, great upside, great monetization aspects, all the nuts and bolts of venture capital. But everything also needs to fit within this 15-year, 20-year mindset. So something that's bicameral, something that's governed by two chambers of thought. So we always sort of think through every opportunity, every decision, every strategy, every partnership that we make between both what's it do for us now and what does it do within this sort of galaxy level view that we try and take on everything.
And what problem does it solve too? Because that's another thing that I think that a lot of people inside a blockchain mistake is they have, you know, they try to you know, fit blockchain into something that doesn't fit, right? Not everything needs a blockchain, right? And I think a lot of people try to massage it into, you know, fitting the square peg into the round hole, so to speak, of you know, incorporating blockchain into a vertical that it's not necessary. So,
and I think we're at the point now, and I think especially in 2017 when the word blockchain was an instant ticket to 15, 20, 30 million bucks.
Yes.
It was getting shoehorned in everywhere. And you hear the famous stories of a juice company renaming as a blockchain company, and there's really just an RTO that happened, but those stories absolutely resonated. And I think now we're almost too much the other way in certain situations where we're not putting blockchain in enough stuff because it's almost a dirty word with market and where everything's gone. But yeah, it's we just need to think about it from a value proposition that resonates with in the billions of people instead of the minority or the leading edge.
Right, and we need to get to a point too where, you know, people don't necessarily know that they're utilizing blockchain technology, right? It's like, hey, I don't need to know the technology behind why my email works or why, you know, what TCP IP is and what HTTPS. I don't need to know. I don't need to know, and nor do I really know. I couldn't program.
Yeah, it goes to space, and my mom gets a picture of my daughter, and that's how it happens, and everybody's happy, and that's all that matters, right? It works.
Exactly. But you also mentioned the user experience and the user interface, and really, you know, designing that from a user perspective rather than from a technological or developer perspective, where, you know, I remember in the early days, well, I mean, early to some, not so early to others, but in 2014, when I first started in this space, when I first used my first wallet, and I thought to myself, good God, who could actually utilize this thing? It's terrible. The user experience is just, you know, you couldn't navigate around it. And now here we are 3, 4, 5 years later, and it's significantly better. Absolutely significantly better, but it needs to even make quantum leaps from here to really engage that if we're going to engage in the billions of people of users.
Well, and I think where it really needs to take the next quantum leap is we've gotten good relatively good at doing the basic applications of crypto and blockchain, of sending money, of creating stable coins, of staking, of doing lending and decentralized finance. But I mean, really where this takes off is when even that part's obfuscated away. I don't want to know I have a wallet. I just want a thing that gets me to a cab from a place to a place, and I earned it by doing another thing over here. Like that's where it needs to get to, is that it's not a wallet, it's a digital piece of value that's just transferring around based on me walking around a city and just monkey braining my way through a day. That's how it gets to the billion people, I think. But I totally take your point. We made a ton of progress, obviously, since 2014.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, I appreciate that. And I think that I completely agree with you, is that we need to make it completely seamless where people don't even know that they're utilizing a wallet. The wallet sits on the back end, right? But they don't even really know that they're utilizing it. So, you know, you spoke on the panel, and one of the things that you had mentioned is you talked about this notion of taking equity versus a token, right? And so can you give me a little bit more idea there on what's the idea of investing in a token versus equity? What's your viewpoint on that? You went into some detail regarding a recent investment where you guys took an equity position, but also trickle down to token value and
yeah.
that. So can you describe a little bit more about that strategy?
Absolutely. And essentially the way that we're thinking about this, and it turns out to have been, we won't say correct for the long term, but definitely correct for the short term from where we started investing in sort of early 2018 to now. Most of the tokens don't exist anymore, never got launched, and that's a whole separate issue. But I think where again, back to our sort of roadmap view of what exists today and how do we incrementally move towards what we want to build in the future. Today, platforms in the world are they're owned by equity holders, and there's this very distinct class system and incentive mismatch often between the equity owners of a platform and the actual users of a platform. What Facebook wants you to do from an equity holder perspective is very different from what you want to do as an actual user perspective. Google the same way. And there ends up with, I think, some of the biggest challenges of the internet or the platform age today is this difference in incentives, where people want to do just what their usual basic thing is. They want to find a website, or they want to post, or they want to get likes, and other people want those users to do something that earns them money. But we've ended up with massively valuable platforms just by doing this style of platform creating, and most businesses today are trying to move towards this platform system. So where the promise of crypto is essentially, instead of having equity and users, it's having token holders, and certain token holders, maybe because they've been around for a while, maybe because they're early, have some kind of governance rights, but what they can do is all governed by these tokens or by their collective voting mechanisms, or a million different ways you can govern a crypto network. So it's a quantum leap from the equity-powered closed-loop systems of today to these open, completely transparent networks of 10, 12, 15 years from now. Now, a lot of people tried to make that jump in 6 months, and you've seen some famously bad examples of completely open networks. I mean, the DAO is probably the most famous example of trying to run something completely transparently, but not thinking through all of the iterations of what that code means, and not having room for human oversight, which I think we underestimate and undervalue all the time. So where we try and invest, and the way we try and do this is, okay, we all want to take these equity-powered networks and slowly move them into these transparent, open, decentralized systems that are governed by token holders over time, but we don't know where the pitfalls are going to be along the way. And we don't know exactly what the right time is to release the first version of the token that the equity holders still control very tightly. We don't know what the timing is to release the next version of the token that actually trades publicly and starts to release more and more control to the community. We don't know what the time is to start fading away that equity, or if there is going to be a time where you start transferring more and more power to the token holder. We do know that it's probably not on day one that you want to have all the power being in the token holder, but we don't know what that transition is going to look like. We're very confident that there's more value in open networks than there is in these closed loop networks. But what that distribution of value is between the equity holders and between the users and token holders, we don't know what it's going to be. We don't know when it's going to happen, and we don't know exactly what the transition period is going to look like. So what we do, and I think what's really important, especially in the early days, is we invest in the equity of these projects. They're early stage startups. It's a venture model. But so we get to take board seats, governance, we have circuit breaker control, we get to design the token, we get to participate in the token launch, we get to do all of these things from the perspective of sort of the old world financing vehicle. So, and then when we actually launch the token, or a version of the token that makes sense, we get to participate in that as a venture capital fund as well. So we end up participating in both the old world vehicle that has the governance and the control, and the new world vehicle that theoretically will accrue value, and I hate saying wipe out, but take the governance value that's accrued into the equity and distribute it across all of the users and all of the builders of the network. But when that's going to happen, how that's going to happen, how the mechanics of that are going to happen, how the interplay between the two is going to happen, is just a big question mark right now. So we want to retain flexibility and play the entire field and play all the different value buckets so that we're in control and we can help drive this whole thing forward. that's sort of the reason why we invest in equity and tokens simultaneously.
Now, is this unique within the VC field or industry, or are other VCs investing in this way, or are you guys kind of blazing a trail there?
So I think it's probably a situation where a bunch of people came up with the model at the same time and all thought that they started it. I think and this is going to sound wildly overconfident and recognize that in advance, I think we've done a lot of thinking on it, maybe that's what I'll say, in terms of this evolution and how the value interplay. Obviously, there's wonderful other VCs out there who have done a ton of thinking as well. I think it's a byproduct of people recognizing that tokens are here to stay, people wanting to play in this market, but people wanting to play with real venture fundamentals, which were remarkably absent in 2017 and during the ICO boom. Like when you say it was $1 billion deployed into blockchain, there's $1 billion speculative dollars deployed into vehicles designed to take speculative dollars. So this is, to me, is sort of a natural byproduct of applying a real venture mindset to a brand new type of technology. How do you ensure that you can deploy your knowledge and deploy your experience into this type of technology? How do you ensure that you can have enough time to actually have it develop and have a real tech cycle? And I think blockchain, and this is a bit of a separate topic that I won't go too deep into here, it's not a typical sort of 5-7 year tech evolution. It's a layer deeper that's a 30, 50 year infrastructure evolution. So to deploy it into a hot money vehicle, that's just a token that you're hoping to hit liquidity in 6 months, it's a complete mismatch of what you're trying to do. So that's sort of why we look to merge these vehicles and play in that space. And I'm sure other people are, and that's more the traditional model today, at least is starting with equity.
Do you distinguish between security tokens and utility tokens in this model, or is it just kind of all thrown together? How do you not even look at a utility token, or do you how are you kind of analyzing those two, spaces, if you will?
We look at, they're all mashed together, but we look at security tokens as essentially proto-utility tokens. So I think in that evolution from equity to this utopia of everybody owning and governing a network purely via utility tokens, security tokens are sort of a waypoint on that, where it's essentially an equity vehicle, but it has a lot more digitized aspects to it. It has a lot more transparency. It's got a lot more liquidity. You can start to have cool hybrid models where you can be an owner and a user with the security token, but we still need to apply it with all the existing securities regulations. So you have to have certain types of users, certain disclosures, certain restrictions on it. So we sort of look at it as an evolution on the way. So we definitely discriminate between security tokens and utility tokens, not in general. But we think about it again as sort of an evolution. And I think the Platonic ideal is to have everybody be an owner user.
So right now, going from more of a security token model to the goal is to go to more to a utilitarian or utility token model.
Sure, and you may, for practicality purposes, and again, who knows how this is all exactly going to shake out. You may still end up with a 2-tier system, but as long as that 2-tier system is transparent and everybody has access to the same information, and everybody, if they really want to, can transfer to the different tier. And if you just need a utility token as your unit to play the game or your medium of exchange or something like that, great. There's a very valid use case for just quick transferable things that are digital to tunes of value that you can put into a smart contract and execute very quickly. There's a different value proposition for a ownership stake that you want people to hold. You want velocity to remain low. You want to have some skin in the game for long term. You want to have some price appreciation. Like those are two different users and two different people who want different things. There's models that make it work within one vehicle, but there's also no need to have just one vehicle. As these things become incredibly fungible and all of the rules become malleable between two, you can have a million different vehicles, and it's probably not going to be us that's choosing them. It's some personalized self-sovereign version of an AI version of us that picks the optimized version of what we own and how we do it when we actually get to the endpoint there.
Fascinating. That's extrapolating even further down the road that I was even imagining, Alex, but wonderful nonetheless. One of the things is you sit from kind of a catbird seat of being a VC. And you mentioned fundamentals, looking at evaluating fundamentals. Obviously, we're going from a top-down hierarchy into more of a decentralized open source hierarchy, or not even a hierarchy, but just distribution model, right? Of decentralized power, if you will. So for somebody who's not in a VC, not sitting in a catbird seat like that, and not deploying millions and millions of dollars worth of capital, but they're their own investor. They want to maybe catch an upside into this ecosystem over the next 5, 10, 20 years. How can they evaluate different projects as a means to investing in them that are not named Bitcoin? Obviously, the easiest thing to do is just hodl Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
But what if they want to have maybe a little bit more upside and maybe a certain niche within a specific industry utilizing the adoption of this technology? So what kind of things or parameters or insights do you have for that particular person?
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And my answer may be a little bit disappointing, I suppose, is that I think a lot of the publicly traded coins today, I won't say they don't have a fundamental value proposition, but the fundamental value proposition is not well understood and well defined. So even if you have a really, really cool project that you really like the idea of, you can't necessarily layer on existing things like what you look at for an equity into a token of it. So maybe like what I was saying before, it becomes just a very quick rip through this system and you end up with a really cool system that doesn't actually retain any value within the token itself. So I think what I would look for from retail is not even a nice word. We always use it disdainfully. But from a casual investor or a non-professional investor within the crypto space is staking coins are interesting, that you can generate a return on your actual token. There's a mechanism that's built in to reduce velocity, and there's a mechanism that's designed to be built in to hold some value within that token or within that coin. Not to talk my own book, but Open Application Network /Aon just launched their staking a couple days ago, and it's really interesting to see the dynamics that it changes from just holders of coins or people who are just holding for price appreciation to more active participation in the network. You've got some of the other major ones of Cosmos, Tezos, even though it has its own challenges. But so staking is an interesting way to play in this space. Decentralized finance in general, it's not glamorous or sexy, but it is a good way to start to play in the ecosystem, take out some of the volatility around just fluctuations of coins that don't have a fundamental value proposition, and start earning a return that you just can't earn in regular world finance. So Celsius, we know those guys pretty well and really like their product. We use them a little bit more centralized, but again, with sort of the open application principles of here's how much we make, whereas a bank takes the majority of it and pays it out to their shareholders, we pay the majority back out to our users via very high interest rates. And obviously they're on the back end of that, funding and borrowing for a bunch of hedging, speculation, whatever the shorter term markets are that people are using stable coins, Bitcoin, and the various other larger coins for. But you can earn an APR of 8.5% on your US dollar stable coin that's backed by US dollars in a real bank. What are you earning in the treasury bill market? 0.5%, if that.
Couldn't agree.
You're starting to get those like 800 basis point differentiators, and that starts to mean things to traders and to people who are playing around. So my first intro to crypto to a lot of my friends is, first off, go and buy one Bitcoin. Just buy one. It's $6,000, $7,000. I know you all have it. Just find out how to do it. It's a good exercise. It's interesting. Buy one Bitcoin, and then figure out how to convert some US dollars or Canadian dollars into a stable coin. Put it in Celsius, where at least there's some centralization. If you're feeling crazy, go and find Compound, where you can actually have a real smart contract that runs all of this. One of my favorite platforms. Love it. But you can start to see some of the easier, shorter-term value propositions in those. The other thing is there's a concept called work tokens, where each token represents the ability to do a certain thing in a network and get paid for it. Those have some fundamental value. Discount tokens, I've kind of gone back and forth on whether they have fundamental value, because they sort of have a cash flow portion mixed into them. But try and find something that you can tie some sort of cash flow to. rather than a lot of these that are a little bit more speculative. There's way deeper, and there's really good work by guys like Chris Berniski and Jack Tatar, who are putting in really good work on bigger, broader, more macro fundamental value propositions for bigger networks, and how this is all going to shake out in 5, 7, 10 years. We just haven't seen the usage yet to really justify any of those, and we haven't seen those what should drive those fundamentals of transaction volume actually have a real playground in the real world to figure it out. So those are all still theories. They're very cool and very compelling theories. I could talk for hours on option valuation and how tokens actually act like options, but I will not for this interview.
Well, we'll have to do that for our advanced interview here in another few months or so. But
awesome.
I appreciate that all, Alex. And so you also had said on the panel previously that you said you believe that maybe the protocol layer had maybe been a little bit overdeveloped at this point. So what do you mean by that, and where does the next wave of innovation need to be in developing this technology?
Sure. And so in the grand scheme of things, the protocol layer is in the first, second, third inning. In the micro evolution part of it, we're adding in features to the protocol layer that we have no need for yet. And it's all a chicken and egg. So the best things, the killer apps that are going to bring 1 billion, 2 billion people on are going to need these features, but those killer apps don't exist yet. So we need to instead spend resources on developing the tooling layers that abstract away the challenges of operating on even the more basic features of platforms, getting developers that aren't Solidity developers, but getting Java developers. Again, the OAN has launched the AVM recently, which is the first Java-based virtual machine. So getting Java developers to say, hey, I've been coding in this for years and years and years. Here's essentially just a new toolkit that now I can access some additional features. So I'm going to take what I build all the time and now just build it better. And oh, hey, it happens to be on blockchain. But that doesn't need necessarily feature, it needs feature A, B, C, D, not necessarily E, F, G, H yet. All of these things need to be developed and need to be thought about, and we can't just get to the point where they're a constraint before starting to think about them. But there's been a lot of overdevelopment at the protocol layer of just adding features and features and features without adding the tooling layer, without adding the abstraction layer, without adding the blockchain as a service layer, and without thinking about really catalyzing and seeding the application layer, which has sort of been like everything, all the value is going to accrue in the protocol anyways, so who cares about the application layer? And we need to think about it in a holistic point of view.
Let's back up a little bit for somebody who may not be as advanced in that. So everything starts at the protocol layer, right? So then what is built above that, and what are the different features in each layer? So can you go into a little bit detail there?
Sure. So the protocol layer is essentially the easiest way to think about it is the internet. It's what connects everything. It's what actually generates the immutability and the security and the digital uniqueness that's inherent and gives blockchain its value. So there's various different types. There's proof of work, proof of stake, delegated proof of stake, lots of different evolution. And maybe this is one place where we're spending the right amount of time on is evolving the consensus mechanism, which is really the fundamental value proposition of blockchain as a whole. But that's essentially what it does, is it creates a distributed ledger of all the things that have happened, distributed across a bunch of different people, and has some way of validating that distributed ledger so that you know it's true and you know people can't mess with it. Above that, there's what needs to be is more of a tooling layer. So we think about it, some people call it layer 2, and there's a bit of a misnomer around layer 2. Some layer 2 stuff is really just advanced features that are protocol level. Some layer 2 is trying to compensate for failures in layer 1 or slow evolution in layer 1. So we've seen lots of scaling layer 2 solutions, which is maybe taking things off chain and running them privately and then putting the results back on chain.
But you still consider that a protocol layer, though. So if like these scaling things that are off chain, do you still consider that a protocol layer, or do you consider it a layer 2 solution?
So I look at that as a layer 2 solution, but honestly, it's somewhat academic. Like whatever makes it work in a way that you don't have to go back and fix later. So if you can come up with a layer 2 solution that will work seamlessly with layer 1 solutions and There's no cap on it. You can look out 10 years from now and say, okay, well, actions can run through this. You're not sacrificing on any of the core fundamentals of it. Then it's an ad, not a hack. So there's also layer 2 stuff like data transmission protocols. So blockchain's wonderful at establishing immutability. So data is one of the things that we really struggle with. Where's my data going? How is it being taken from me? Where is it ending up? Who's monetizing on it? So a protocol that essentially adds additional logic that takes the generic blockchain ability to create immutability and create traceability and layers on, okay, well, here's actually when you take your data from Facebook and move it over here, I'm leveraging blockchain to create a traceable record or a data supply chain. That's a layer 2 protocol as well, but it's something that's very highly targeted towards something. And then you layer an application on top of that that's like, okay, well, now I'm using my Facebook to grab data and sell it to an insurance company that wants to get access to me. But it's something that sits at the very top layer of it. So those are sort of the layers as we think about them.
Okay, and what you're saying is that we're overdeveloped on the protocol layer, but we're underdeveloped on the subsequent layers. So in order to really bridge the gap and bring in 1 billion people, we need to really develop and focus our efforts on the application layers. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the application layer, the middleware layer. I think where the middleware layer is a really interesting layer because it's essentially blockchain as a service. And there's some element of centralization to it, which I think people look at as a bit of an icky word right now, but the best early app developers essentially realized they needed to start developing not even at the ground floor, but in like the core of the earth. And so they developed all of these tools, and then they realized they're like, oh, damn, there's actually a really good business model in the tooling layer here. So node management as a service, white label walleting, seamless or human readable contact names, just all of those sort of feature sets that people can offer as SDKs, people can offer as API services. All of those just make it easier and easier and easier for industry vertical experts to get involved and to build great experiences in mobility and healthcare. You need people who come from mobility and healthcare. You don't need blockchain guys building those because that's not how you get 1 billion people. Correct. So you need to be able to bridge that gap, and that's where we're spending a lot of our time.
Excellent. No, that's wonderful insight there. So Alex, one of the key fundamentals of blockchain and the crypto networks is their open nature, right? And how everyone can join and it's not censored and all that stuff. So enforcing this openness with technology at this maturity of blockchain is difficult. So how can these mindsets be implemented in today's world where we can kind of kickstart this, decentralized evolution from the top-down hierarchical model that were the legacy systems? Right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the key points that I think I've hit on a few times in this talk today, and what we spend a lot of time thinking about is we think there's so much more value in this open model of transparency and sharing and value share from the equity back to the actual user base, from the people who are organizing the network down to the end user, and more than just intangible value, which is what a lot of networks share today. Like Facebook gives you the ability to like and earn social rewards, blah, 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 but the actual tangible value that flows back through as well. And so we think there's a ton more value in networks that are built on those types of principles and those types of open principles. But as you mentioned, it's really hard to get to that standard with governed strictly by technology. So Open Application Network is something that's trying to build APIs and SDKs and little tools that allow people with existing closed loop networks to start deploying little bits of this openness into their existing network without really needing to understand all the way down to the ground floor that we're using this as a blockchain module that we're deploying on. Also allows people with 2 clicks of a button to essentially create an open network with easy crypto economics, easy token generation, just so you can start playing around with what does a truly completely open network look like in its basic form before you start layering up to a really full, robust, complete network. But where we think about it even earlier than any technology is just the mindsets of this. It's easy not easy, but as an equity company today, you can choose to take a portion of what you're earning from data monetization of your platform and plow it back in either directly or indirectly into benefits for your consumers. You can choose to make an end user license agreement that has 5 bullet points that says, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. Sure, you can have the 50 pages of legalese afterwards, but you can choose to let consumers in and bring data creators into the value chain of what you're actually making on your platform. All of those are choices that networks can make. And we're not going to see the prime networks, we're not going to see the big incumbents make those choices. We're going to see the number 5 and 6 networks start making those choices. And then we're going to see an unexpectedly successful rise from one of those networks. You're not going to see the Googles and Facebooks of the world start to change because they're so locked into their quarterly profit mode and they can't really start to do things like that. But you're going to start seeing some upstarts and some incumbents that are starting to play that way. And I think that's going to be really where a lot of this stuff takes off, is just those first couple of examples that start to really work and start to really resonate with people. I think you'll definitely start to see really transparent data monetization sharing. We're working on something that we can't talk about too much today, that is the first and farthest along that we've seen example of this at scale, that we think will have a big impact in setting a new data paradigm and a new transparency paradigm. All towards it's not a give by the company. It's a value maximizing effort, but it's value maximizing effort that you need to have a 3, 5, 7 year view on. And we all know how the corporate world of shareholder maximization works on a quarterly basis today. So I think we're moving towards the right direction in terms of doing it with tech, but we can move towards that today just with doing it with mindsets. And I think that's what we're pushing towards.
Yeah, and you're not going to see the incumbents do anything dramatic to change that because they have no incentive to do so. It's only until they've been disrupted will they really start to say, hey, okay, we need to reevaluate what we're doing. And by that time, they're already 3, 4, or 5 years too late. So yeah, that's very interesting. So I appreciate all this. This has been absolutely fantastic. And you are definitely one of the top thought leaders that I think that maybe we haven't recognized your name yet, but what you guys are doing from a VC model is very, very exciting. And I know that you'll be a lot more, your profile will be a lot more elevated as people get to know your name down the road, Alex. So I
appreciate that, Dominic. Thank you very much.
I very much appreciate this. But in closing, one of the things that I like to ask my guests is that, obviously you've achieved some significant level of success in what you're doing. What is the best advice that you've ever been given?
Best advice I've ever been given, I think, is try and override what your first thought is, or I always think about everything in terms of lizard brain and human brain. Your lizard brain was really optimized for stuff that happened a long, long, long time ago. It's got some value still today, but just take a second. When something comes at you, you're going to react, and you're going to react in an instinctual way. Just take a second. And I think we all would be so much better off as a society. And I've made some interesting but good long-term decisions by sort of being able to just take a second, not reacting to an immediate stimulus, and just thinking long-term. We always get what we incent. We always seem to optimize for the short term, and we always seem to, en masse especially, act like a bunch of animals. But if everybody, I think, could just take a second, try and activate some higher order thinking, I think we'd all be a lot better off. And I think it's some of the reason why I'm where I'm at today is a relatively good ability to do that. Although we're all still monkeys after all.
Yeah, we are. Indeed, we are. Well, that's wonderful. One last thing that I would like to ask you is, forecast, 10 years, 15 years from now, not necessarily like what's Bitcoin's price going to be at, but what kind of society are we living in? What does it look like? What kind of manifestations of this technology have we seen? And, just maybe even this is your utopian version, but just share with what you think you see this world looking like in 10 years. Are we driving autonomous vehicles powered by blockchain, or like what's occurring, and how is this how has this technology manifested itself in our daily life?
Sure. So, and I'll go the utopian version of it, not the dystopian version of it, because there's definitely a world where that exists, but that's way too overmined for fantasy. I mean, the way that I think about it is we're wonderful as individuals, but when we start acting en masse, we end up always making suboptimal decisions as a mass unit. So I think the way a lot of this technology is going to go is essentially enabling us to inject some humanity into a giant computerized version of our society that's optimized for things that actually make humans happy and feel good. We're not good at understanding what makes us happy and feel good, but we're starting to develop the technology that can start to understand some of that. Biometrics, wearables, those types of devices. If we keep going with our current surveillance capitalism world, just to briefly go to the dystopian version, we're essentially going to end up with all of those impulses being used against us to make us do things that are valuable to commercial entities and to commercial enterprises. With this type of technology, when we can start having our own personal data vaults, our own personalized AI, our own self-sovereignty where we can choose what we want to share without losing the personalization and customization that marks the hallmark of the evolution of Web 2 so far, I think we can really start actually pouring more and more of our data, our habits, our thoughts, our emotions, our physical well-being, all of that into something that has a 360-degree digitized view of us, and then start actually optimizing on a way better way than trying to filter through all of our kind of idiotic impulses and trying to make the best decisions we can right now. So I think in 10, 15 years down the line, we're actually going to have unbelievably advanced, digitized, optimized versions of ourselves that are going to be our digital avatars. So when I was talking at the start about the exponential increase in commerce, that's obviously not slowing, but I don't think it's going to be us as individuals who are wading through all of that and wading through the algorithms that are essentially trying to push us in different directions. It's going to be digitized versions of ourselves, whether it's conversationally controlled, whether it's happening at machine speed, or whatever the actual implementation of that is. They're going to be empowered to transact via blockchain. They're going to have digitized wallets. They're going to be able to do commerce and negotiations that exponentially faster than we can, and with exponentially more information, and get to optimal outcomes that we as humans just can't get to individually. So overall, we'll end up with an optimized society that's far more inclusive, far less bias-driven. We won't have financial exclusion because essentially we've fixed all the infrastructure. Now a 1 cent transaction or a half-cent transaction is economic, whereas today we have trillions of capital sitting against settlement, so we need to interact in $10, $20, $50 increments to make it worthwhile. But we won't see all of that. A lot of that will be behind the scenes. Hopefully we'll have something that's optimizing for all of us at an individual level that makes us happy. And it won't be dollars because that's a proxy for happiness. It'll be something deeper. So philosophy is probably going to be the skill set that dominates the next 10 or 15 years, because those are the algorithms that you're trying to maximize for now. Isn't money, it's something better.
Wow. Well, I can't even follow up that and give justice. Alex, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I look forward to speaking with you again in the very near future. So
100%. We'll talk soon. Appreciate the time.